A retired doctor vanishes on a solo hike up Mount Rainier, leaving his family in anguish. 4 years later, a chilling discovery in Mammoth Cave changes everything. What secret was he hiding that someone wanted buried forever? Hey, don't forget to like. Please subscribe for more shocking crime stories and hit the bell icon. The darkest truth are yet to come. Laura Bennett stood frozen in her Seattle kitchen, the scent of burnt toast filling the air as her phone buzzed relentlessly on the counter. It was a crisp October morning in 2025, the kind of day her husband, Thomas Bennett, would have loved for a hike. Clear skies, the distant peak of Mount Rainier, glowing pink in the dawn light. 4 years ago, he'd left for one of those hikes, promising to be back by sunset. He never returned. The police had called it a tragic accident, maybe suicide, but Laura never believed it. Thomas was too careful, too devoted to her and their daughter, Emily. Now, the phone screen flashed an unknown number with a Kentucky area code. Her heart pounded as she answered, the voice on the other end shattering her routine. "Mrs. Bennett, this is Ranger Carla Evans from Mammoth Cave National Park. We've found something. It belongs to your husband." The words hit like a punch. Laura's knees buckled, and she gripped the counter, the cold granite grounding her as the ranger's voice continued. Hikers exploring a remote section of Mammoth Cave had stumbled across a waterlogged satchel, half buried in sediment near an underground river. The satchel's leather was cracked, but the engraved initials, TB, and a serial number on a GPS tracker inside confirmed it was Thomas's. "We need you to come to the park office in Kentucky," Ranger Evans said, her tone professional but laced with urgency. "The police are here, and we have questions." Laura's mind raced. Kentucky? Thomas had disappeared in Washington. How had his satchel ended up 2,000 miles away in a cave? She drove to the airport in a daze, the familiar Seattle skyline blurring past her window. Thomas had been a cardiologist, meticulous in his work and his hobbies. He'd hiked Mount Rainier for decades, always packing extra supplies, checking weather reports, filing permits. The police had searched for weeks after he vanished in October 2021, finding nothing but his car at the Paradise Trailhead. They concluded he'd fallen, or worse, chosen to end his life after retiring. Laura had fought that narrative, her voice hoarse from arguing with detectives. Thomas had been excited about retirement, planning a cross-country RV trip, teaching Emily's kids to sail. Suicide didn't fit, neither did an accident. Now this discovery in Mammoth Cave was proof she'd been right to doubt. At the Mammoth Cave Park office, the air smelled of damp earth and pine. Ranger Evans, a wiry woman in her 50s with a no-nonsense demeanor, met Laura at the door. "Mrs. Bennett, thank you for coming so quickly." She led Laura to a small room where a county detective, a man named Hargrove with tired eyes and a graying mustache, waited beside a table. On it sat Thomas's satchel, its leather stained and frayed, but unmistakable. Laura's breath caught as she recognized the brass buckle Thomas had repaired himself after a trip to Glacier National Park. Beside it lay a plastic evidence bag containing a cracked smartphone and a water-damaged notebook, its pages warped but intact. "We traced the satchel through the GPS tracker's serial number," Ranger Evans explained, pointing to a topographic map of the cave system. "It was found in a chamber called the River Styx, about 3 miles into the cave's wild zone, lodged in sediment where the underground river narrows." Detective Hargrove opened a folder. "The phone's dead, but the notebook's pages are partially legible. We recovered data from the GPS tracker's memory card too. It shows your husband's last recorded location wasn't Mount Rainier. It was here in Kentucky on October 12th, 2021. Laura's stomach churned. "That's impossible. Thomas was hiking in Washington. He told me himself that morning over coffee. He said he needed a day alone on the mountain to think about retirement." She could still see him, his gray eyes crinkling as he kissed her forehead, promising to be back for dinner. The detective's expression remained neutral. "The GPS data is clear, Mrs. Bennett. The last signal came from Mammoth Cave, not Rainier. He was nowhere near the trail he filed with the Park Service." Laura shook her head, her voice rising. "Thomas never lied to me. Not in 35 years. He wouldn't just go to Kentucky without telling me." Hargrove slid the notebook across the table. Take a look. We need you to confirm if this is his handwriting. Laura's hands trembled as she opened the cover. Thomas's precise, slanted script stared back at her, faded but unmistakable. The entries were dated, detailing his final week. Appointments, reminders, a grocery list for their anniversary dinner. But one entry from October 11, 2021 made her heart stop. Meeting with D. Sullivan, 7 a.m., Mammoth Cave parking lot. Laura's vision blurred. Who was D. Sullivan? Why had Thomas written this? He'd told her he was hiking alone. Mrs. Bennett, Hargrove said, his voice softening, the data suggests your husband went to Kentucky deliberately. The satchel ending up in the cave's river could mean an accident or something else. We're not reopening the case yet, but we need to know if he mentioned anyone named Sullivan. Laura's mind spun. Sullivan wasn't a name she knew. Thomas had colleagues, patients, friends, but no Sullivan. He never mentioned anyone by that name, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. But he was different that last week, quiet, checking his phone more than usual. Imagine if you woke up one day and the person you trusted most was hiding something that could change everything. That's how Laura felt, staring at that notebook. The weight of 4 years of grief colliding with this new mystery. I came across this story in a local Kentucky news report, and it's haunted me since. Because it's not just about a missing doctor. It's about what people do to protect the truth, no matter the cost. Laura left the park office clutching a photocopy of the notebook's pages, the originals kept as evidence. The drive to her hotel felt endless, each mile amplifying her questions. Why had Thomas gone to Mammoth Cave? Who was D. Sullivan? She thought back to his final days. He'd been distracted, yes, but not depressed. He'd spent hours in his home office, the door closed, which wasn't like him. Once she'd caught him slipping a folder into his desk drawer, his face tightening when he saw her. Just old patient files, he'd said, but his smile hadn't reached his eyes. Back at the hotel, Laura spread the photocopy pages on the bed. The notebook detailed mundane tasks, prescription refills, a lunch with their daughter, but also cryptic notes. One, dated October 9th, read, check KMC records. Discrepancies confirmed. Another from October 10th, Onifoscated farm, call EP by my legal advice. Laura's pulse quickened. KMC, Kentucky Medical Center? Thomas had worked there briefly as a consultant after retiring from his Seattle practice. An EP? Could that be a lawyer? She Googled EP Attorney Kentucky on her phone, her fingers clumsy with urgency. The first result was for Elizabeth Porter, a Louisville-based employment lawyer specializing in whistleblower cases. Laura dialed the number, her heart in her throat. A receptionist answered, then transferred her to Porter herself. Mrs. Bennett, the attorney said, her voice calm but cautious. I remember your husband. He came to me 4 years ago asking about whistleblower protections. Laura gripped the phone. What was he planning to report? There was a pause. I'm limited by privilege, even now, but he was concerned about financial irregularities at a medical facility. He'd gathered evidence, billing records, patient files. He was worried about retaliation, especially against his family. The word retaliation sent a chill down Laura's spine. Thomas had always been ethical to a fault, the kind of doctor who stayed late to double-check diagnoses, who refused to cut corners. Had he uncovered something dangerous enough to make him a target? Did he mention someone named Sullivan? Laura asked. Porter hesitated. Not directly, but he referenced a meeting with someone high up in the organization. He was preparing to confront them with evidence. He had an appointment with me on October 13th, but he never showed. Laura hung up, her mind racing. Thomas had been building a case, something serious enough to consult a lawyer. She flipped through the notebook again, stopping at an entry from October 12th. D. Sullivan knows. Must resolve tomorrow. Resolve what? She thought of the satchel in Mammoth Cave, carried by the underground river. Had Thomas been in that cave? Or had someone taken his belongings there to hide them? The next morning, Laura drove to Kentucky Medical Center in Louisville, a sprawling complex of glass and steel. Thomas had consulted there for 6 months, helping streamline their cardiology department. The lobby was sterile, all white marble, and hushed voices. At the reception desk, a young woman with a tight smile greeted her. I'm Laura Bennett. My husband, Dr. Thomas Bennett, worked here. I need to speak with someone who knew him. The receptionist's smile falters. One moment, please. She made a call, her voice low, then directed Laura to the administrative office. A man in his 40s, wearing a tailored suit and a practiced smile, met her there. Mrs. Bennett, I'm Mark Reynolds, the current director. I didn't work with your husband, but I'm sorry for your loss. How can I help? Laura explained the satchel, the notebook, the meeting with Sullivan. Reynolds' face remained impassive, but his fingers tapped the desk. I don't know anyone named Sullivan here, he said. The staff has turned over since 2021, but I can check our records. Perhaps a former employee? Laura's gut told her he was holding back. Thomas was investigating something here. Billing discrepancies, maybe worse. Did he ever mention concerns? Reynolds' smile tightened. Your husband was well respected, but I wasn't here then. I'll have my assistant pull any relevant files. He stood, signaling the conversation was over, but Laura caught a flicker of unease in his eyes. As she left, she noticed a framed photo on the wall, a group of doctors at a 2021 fundraiser. Thomas was there, smiling, but next to him stood a man whose face made her pause. The nameplate read, Dr. David Sullivan, Chief of Operations. Back in her car, Laura's hands shook as she Googled David Sullivan. The results were sparse, a LinkedIn profile listing him as a former KMC executive, now running a private clinic in Nashville. His photo matched the man in the fundraiser picture. Thomas had met with Sullivan the morning he disappeared. Why had he lied about hiking alone? What had he confronted Sullivan about? Laura thought about calling the police but hesitated. Hargrove had been clear. They weren't reopening the case without more evidence. She needed to know more. She drove to the address of Sullivan's new clinic, a sleek building on the outskirts of Nashville. The parking lot was nearly empty, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows. Inside, the receptionist, a woman in her 20s, looked up with a polite smile. I'm here to see Dr. Sullivan, Laura said, keeping her voice steady. I don't have an appointment, but it's about an old colleague, Dr. Thomas Bennett. The receptionist's smile faded. Dr. Sullivan's not in today. Can I take a message? Laura noticed the woman's hands fidgeting, her eyes darting toward a closed office door. Is he really not here? Laura pressed. This is urgent. It's about something Thomas left behind. The receptionist hesitated, then picked up the phone, speaking in a low voice. Moments later, a man emerged from the office, tall, silver-haired, with the same polished demeanor as the man in the photo. Mrs. Bennett, he said, his voice smooth but guarded. I'm David Sullivan. I was so sorry to hear about Thomas. How can I help? Laura's heart pounded. This was the man Thomas had met that morning. They found his satchel in Mammoth Cave, she said, watching his face closely, with a notebook mentioning a meeting with you, October 12, 2021, the day he disappeared. Sullivan's smile didn't waver, but his eyes narrowed slightly. I'm afraid you're mistaken. I hadn't seen Thomas in weeks before he vanished. Perhaps he meant another Sullivan? His tone was too calm, too rehearsed. Laura pressed harder. His notebook was clear. He wrote about meeting you at Mammoth Cave. He was investigating something, billing issues, maybe more. What did he want to talk about? Sullivan's expression hardened, his voice dropping. Mrs. Bennett, I understand grief can make us see connections where there are none. Thomas was a good man, but he was under stress. Retirement can be hard. If he wrote about a meeting, maybe he was confused. The lie was so blatant, it took Laura's breath away. Thomas confused? The man who memorized patient charts, who never missed a detail? She wanted to scream, but she kept her voice steady. The police have the notebook, Dr. Sullivan. They're looking into it. It was a bluff, but it landed. Sullivan's jaw twitched. And for a moment, his polished facade cracked. I'd be careful about stirring up old wounds, he said, his tone icy. Some things are better left buried. As Laura left the clinic, her legs felt unsteady. Sullivan's words echoed in her mind in a thinly veiled threat. She glanced back, catching him watching her from the window, his phone already to his ear. Who was he calling? What was he afraid she'd uncover? In her car, she checked her phone and saw a missed call from Ranger Evans. The voicemail was brief. Mrs. Bennett, we found something else in the satchel, a hidden pocket with a USB drive. The data's corrupted, but our techs are working on it. Call me back. Laura's breath caught. A USB drive? Thomas had always backed up important files, patient records, research, even hiking routes. What was on that drive that someone wanted hidden in Mammoth Cave? She started the engine, her mind racing with possibilities. Had Thomas uncovered something so dangerous that Sullivan or someone else had silenced him? As she pulled onto the highway, a black SUV appeared in her rearview mirror, tailing her too closely. Her heart skipped. Was she being followed? The road stretched ahead, leading back toward Mammoth Cave, where the truth about Thomas's final days lay buried. But someone was watching, and they didn't want her digging any deeper. Laura Bennett's hands gripped the steering wheel as she sped down the Kentucky highway, the black SUV still tailing her in the fading October light. The voicemail from Ranger Evans echoed in her mind. A USB drive, hidden in Thomas's satchel, found in Mammoth Cave's River Styx. Whatever was on that drive had been important enough for Thomas to conceal it, and for someone to want it lost forever. She glanced in her rearview mirror, her pulse racing. The SUV was closer now, its tinted windows hiding the driver's face. Was it Sullivan? Someone he'd called? Laura's gut screamed danger, but she couldn't go to the police, not yet. Detective Hargrove had been skeptical, and without concrete evidence, they'd dismiss her as a grieving widow chasing ghosts. She needed to know what was on that USB drive. She pulled into a crowded gas station, hoping the public setting would deter her pursuer. The SUV slowed but didn't stop, cruising past and disappearing down the road. Laura exhaled, her hands shaking as she dialed Ranger Evans. Mrs. Bennett, the ranger answered, her voice tense. Our techs recovered partial data from the USB drive. It's encrypted, but there are file names, billing records, patient logs, all labeled KMC. We're sending it to the FBI's cyber unit, but it'll take time. Can you come to the park office tomorrow? Laura agreed, her mind spinning. Kentucky Medical Center. Thomas's cryptic notebook entry. Check KMC records. Chiropodist named David Sullivan, now running a private clinic in Nashville, and his evasive behavior when she'd confronted him about Thomas's disappearance. Laura barely slept that night, her hotel room feeling like a cage. She kept replaying Sullivan's words. Some things are better left buried. The threat in his tone was unmistakable. Thomas had been onto something big, billing discrepancies, maybe worse. And Sullivan knew more than he was letting on. At dawn, she drove back to Mammoth Cave National Park, the mountain's silhouette a distant reminder of the day Thomas vanished. The park office was busier now, with rangers and a few local cops milling about. Ranger Evans greeted her, her face grim. The FBI's involved now, she said, leading Laura to a conference room. The USB drive's data is still being decrypted, but the file names suggest financial irregularities at KMC. We also found a handwritten note in the satchel's hidden pocket, missed in the initial search. She slid a plastic evidence bag across the table. Inside was a crumpled paper with Thomas's handwriting. Sullivan meeting confirmed. Evidence secure. FBI APT 1013. Laura's heart sank. Thomas had been planning to go to the FBI the day after he disappeared. He'd known he was in danger, yet he'd kept her in the dark to protect her. She thought of their last breakfast together, his quiet smile as he sipped his coffee, hiding the weight of what he'd uncovered. I need to know what he found, Laura said, her voice steady despite the ache in her chest. Can I see the USB drive's file list? Evans hesitated, then handed her a printout. The file names were clinical, KMC billing SEP21, XLSX patient logs 2021 PDF, but one stood out, Darkpool transfers.doc. Darkpool? It sounded financial, secretive. Laura's mind flashed to Thomas's late nights in his office, the folder he'd hidden from her. Had he been digging into something illegal at KMC? Imagine if your entire world shifted in a single moment. Learning the person you loved was carrying a secret that cost them their life. That's what Laura was grappling with. Standing in that ranger station, holding proof that Thomas wasn't just a missing hiker. He was a man on a mission. I keep thinking about how heavy that must have felt, knowing he chose to face danger alone to shield her. Would you have done the same or told someone you trusted? It's the kind of question that lingers long after the story ends. Laura drove to Louisville, determined to confront Sullivan again. His clinic's polished exterior felt like a mask, hiding whatever he'd been desperate to keep buried. She parked across the street, watching the building. Sullivan arrived at 8 a.m., his silver hair catching the morning sun. As he stepped out of a sleek BM, Laura's phone buzzes. A text from her daughter, Emily. "Mom, you okay? Call me." Laura replied quickly, not wanting to worry her, but her hands trembled. She texted her sister, Karen too, at Sullivan's clinic in Nashville. "If I'm not back by noon, call the police." Karen's response was immediate. "Laura, what's going on? Be careful." Laura tucked her phone away, steeling herself. She wasn't leaving without answers. Inside, the same receptionist faltered when Laura asked for Sullivan. "He's in a meeting," she said, her eyes flicking nervously to the office door. Laura didn't buy it. "Tell him it's about Thomas Bennett's USB drive," she said, her voice firm. The receptionist's face paled, and she hurried to the back. Moments later, Sullivan emerged, his smile tight, his eyes cold. "Mrs. Bennett, twice in 2 days? This is becoming a habit." He gestured to a private office, closing the door behind them. The room smelled of leather and antiseptic, a stark contrast to the muddy satchel from Mammoth Cave. "I know about the USB drive," Laura said, watching his reaction. "Billing records, patient logs, something called dark pool transfers. Thomas was going to the FBI. What did you do to him?" Sullivan's face remained composed, but his fingers twitched, betraying his nerves. "You're chasing shadows, Laura. Thomas was my friend. I was devastated when he disappeared. If he had concerns about KMC, he never shared them with me." His voice was smooth, practiced, but Laura caught the slight tremor in his hand as he adjusted his tie. "Then why did he write about meeting you at Mammoth Cave?" she pressed. "Why was his satchel found there with evidence he was ready to expose?" Sullivan leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing. "You're grieving, I understand, but you're weaving a conspiracy from nothing. Thomas was stressed, maybe confused. He loved hiking. Maybe he got lost in the cave." Laura's anger flared. "Thomas didn't get lost. He was meticulous. You met him that morning, and now he's gone. What are you hiding?" Sullivan's smile vanished. "Be careful, Mrs. Bennett. Accusations like that can ruin lives. Yours included." The threat hung heavy, but Laura didn't flinch. "The FBI has the USB drive," she said, another bluff. "They're decrypting it now. If you're involved, they'll find out." Sullivan stood, his face darkening. "You're out of your depth, Laura. Leave this alone, for your daughter's sake." The mention of Emily sent a chill through her, but it also fueled her resolve. She left the clinic, her heart pounding, and called Ranger Evans from her car. "Any progress on the USB drive?" she asked. Evans's voice was cautious. "The FBI's making headway. The dark pool transfers file mentions offshore accounts and coded patient IDs. They think it's tied to money laundering through KMC's billing system. We're coordinating with Louisville PD to question Sullivan." Laura's breath caught. Money laundering. Thomas had uncovered a criminal operation, and Sullivan was at the center. As she drove back to her hotel, the black SUV reappeared in her rearview mirror, closer this time. Laura's heart raced. She took a sharp turn onto a side street, then another, trying to lose them. The SUV kept pace, its driver relentless. Panic surged as she realized they weren't giving up. She pulled into a busy shopping center, weaving through parked cars, and dialed 911. "I'm being followed," she whispered, her voice shaking. "I'm at Green Hills Mall in Nashville. It's a black SUV, no plates visible. I think it's tied to my husband's case." The operator's calm voice instructed her to stay in a public area and wait for a patrol unit. Laura parked near the mall entrance, her eyes locked on the SUV as it idled across the lot. Minutes later, sirens wailed, and 2 police cruisers screeched in. The SUV sped off, but one cruiser gave chase while the other approached Laura. "Mrs. Bennett?" a young officer asked. "You're safe now. Detective Hargrove's on his way." Laura nodded, her body trembling. The fear was real, but so was her determination. Thomas had died for the truth, and she wouldn't let his sacrifice be buried. Hargrove arrived, his tired eyes now sharp with urgency. The FBI decrypted more of the USB drive, he said, escorting her to his cruiser for safety. Your husband documented a money laundering scheme at KMC, false billing for non-existent procedures, funneled through offshore accounts labeled Dark Pool. Sullivan was the overseer, working with a network of administrators and a private security firm to cover it up. Laura's chest tightened. Did he kill Thomas? Hargrove's jaw clenched. We're bringing him in for questioning. The USB drive has enough to open a federal investigation, but we need more to tie him to your husband's death. Laura's mind flashed to Thomas's notebook. The careful entries, the hidden USB drive. He'd been so thorough, so brave, knowing the risk. She handed Hargrove the photocopied pages. This is Thomas's handwriting. He was meeting Sullivan the day he disappeared. He was going to the FBI. Hargrove studied the pages, his expression grim. This changes things. We're searching Sullivan's properties now. If he's guilty, we'll find proof. That evening, Laura sat in a Louisville police station giving her statement. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows. Hargrove returned, his face weary but resolute. Sullivan's cracking, he said. We found emails on his home computer, deleted but recoverable, arranging a meeting with Thomas at Mammoth Cave. He hired 2 men, former security contractors, to intercept Thomas on the trail. They lured him into the cave, claiming they needed a private place to discuss the billing issues. Thomas thought he could reason with them. Hargrove paused, his voice softening. They pushed him into a chasm, a 150-foot drop. His body, it's still there, caught in a crevice. Recovery teams are working now. Laura's vision blurred with tears. Murder. Not an accident, not suicide, murder. She pictured Thomas in that dark cave, trusting Sullivan, hoping to resolve things peacefully. Why? She whispered. Hargrove pulled out a file. Sullivan's operation was worth millions. Fake billings, laundered through offshore accounts, funding a network across 3 states. Thomas found the discrepancies during his consulting and work. He copied records, traced transfers, and consulted Elizabeth Porter about blowing the whistle. Sullivan found out, offered him a payout, $500 to stay quiet. Thomas refused. He was going to the FBI that afternoon. The room spun. Thomas had died for his integrity, for doing what was right. Laura thought of his gentle laugh, the way he'd read bedtime stories to their grandkids. He'd known the danger but faced it anyway. We arrested Sullivan and one of his contractors, Hargrove continued. The second is in custody in Ohio. The FBI's dismantling the network. Your husband's evidence broke it open. Laura nodded, tears streaming down her face. She could bury Thomas now, give him the funeral he deserved, with the truth laid bare. As she left the station, the Kentucky sky was ablaze with sunset. Mount Rainier, a distant memory. Thomas had walked into that cave to confront evil, and though it cost him his life, his courage had won. Sullivan would face trial, his empire crumbling, his accomplices named. The recovery team would bring Thomas home, his remains finally at rest. Laura drove to Emily's house, ready to tell her daughter the truth, her heart heavy but proud. Thomas hadn't just been a doctor or a husband, he'd been a hero. Sometimes the truth costs everything, but it's the only thing that sets you free. Thomas paid that price and Laura carried his legacy forward, a beacon in the darkness of corruption. Well, have you ever heard of a case like this? Comment your thoughts. That's all for today. Thanks for watching and catch you in the next one.